I want to be very clear about something before I start. I was not snooping. I was not going through her things, checking her phone, reading her messages, none of that. I came home from 11 days on the road. I was exhausted and hungry, and I just wanted to sit down for 10 minutes before I did anything else. I opened the laptop to check the weather for the next week because my next route was going north and I wanted to know what I was driving into. That's it. That's all I was doing. The browser had 4 tabs open. Weather.com was one of them. I clicked on it and checked the forecast, and I was about to close the laptop when I noticed the second tab. It was her Gmail. And the email that was open, the one sitting right there on the screen, was not something I was supposed to see. I know this because the first line read, "Last night was everything. I keep thinking about the way you." I stopped reading after that. For about 3 seconds. And then I kept reading, and I read the whole thing. And then I read the one below it, and the one below that. And I sat in my own kitchen in Tucson, Arizona, still wearing the clothes I'd driven 11 days in, and I read through 4 months of emails between my wife and a man named Derek Weston, and by the time I was done, I knew more about their relationship than I knew about most things in my own life. My name is Owen. I'm 44. I drive long-haul freight. Have been doing it for going on 18 years, mostly Southwest regional routes, but sometimes I'll take a long pull up to Denver or out to the California coast if the money's right. It is not a romantic job. People have this idea of truckers as these independent road warriors with a kind of rugged freedom, and I'll be honest, there are moments like that. Moments on a two-lane through the desert at 5 in the morning with nothing around you but flat land and a pink sky, and you feel like you own the whole world. But mostly it's loading docks and way stations and truck stops and trying to find somewhere decent to eat at 9 at night in a town you've never been to and will never come back to. It pays well if you're willing to put in the hours, and I've always been willing to put in the hours. Sandra and I met in 2016 at a friend's backyard birthday party on the east side of Tucson. It was June, which means it was about 103 degrees, and she was standing under the one tree that was providing actual shade like she'd claimed territory and wasn't giving it up for anything. I thought that was funny. I walked over and stood in the shade next to her, and we talked for 2 hours, and I got her number before I left, and I called her the next day, which is not something I usually did, but Sandra was not someone you waited on. You could tell that immediately. She was 38 then, worked as an office manager for a dental practice on Oracle Road. Organized, sharp, practical in the way that people who've been running things efficiently their whole lives are practical. She could look at a problem and tell you in about 30 seconds what needed to happen and in what order. I found that quality deeply attractive, partly because I'm someone who tends to just get in the truck and start driving and figure out the details along the way, and she balanced that out. We were good at being different from each other in ways that helped. We got married in October 2017 at a small outdoor ceremony at Tejano Chul Park. It was her idea, the botanical garden, and it was perfect in the way things are perfect when someone knows exactly what they want and goes and gets it. 40 guests, good food, string lights, the saguaro cacti standing around in the dark like quiet witnesses. I remember that night clearly. All of it. We bought our house on Waverly Street the following year. 3 bedrooms, a covered back patio, a neighborhood that's quiet in the morning and smells like creosote after it rains. Sandra planted things along the back fence, lantana, desert willow, a lemon tree that took a while to establish itself, and then went absolutely wild. The house felt like hers in the way that houses feel like whoever cares about them most, and she cared about it, and I was gone a lot, and that is a fact that becomes important later. My flaw? And Sandra had said this to me more than once in 7 years, in the careful way she said difficult things, was that I treated my time at home like recovery instead of like living. I'd come off a long haul, and I needed a day or two to decompress, to just sit and be still and not have anywhere to be, and those days had a tendency to stretch. I'd sit on the porch, watch TV, avoid making plans, not be fully present. She'd want to go somewhere, do something, connect, and I'd be in this fog of reentry that I could never quite shake fast enough. She wasn't wrong about it. I knew she wasn't wrong about it. I told myself I'd get better at it, and I didn't. Not really. And I think that gap between us, the gap that opened up on all those days when I came home, but wasn't really home, is where something else eventually moved in. I'm not saying it was my fault. I want to be careful here. There's a difference between contributing to a distance and deciding to fill that distance with someone else. I'm responsible for the first thing. She's responsible for the second. Derek Weston came into our lives in January of this year. We'd been having a problem with the back patio. The concrete had cracked and was heaving in a couple of spots. Water was pooling near the foundation, and we'd been talking about getting it fixed for 2 summers. Sandra finally took the initiative while I was on a run to Albuquerque and got 3 quotes and hired someone. I came home, and the work was already scheduled, and I thought, great, good, that's one less thing. That's how I thought about it. One less thing on the list. Derek ran a small concrete and landscaping operation. Mid-30s, had his own crew, did good work on the patio. I saw it when it was done, and it was solid, clean, exactly what we described. Sandra mentioned him once or twice as someone professional and easy to work with, and I didn't think anything of it, because why would I? He did the job. He was paid. That was the end of the story. Except apparently it wasn't. The first thing I noticed, and filed away and tried to forget, was in March. I'd been on a 12-day pull, and I came home, and Sandra was different in a way I couldn't name. Lighter. More animated. She'd cut her hair a little shorter and gotten new earrings I'd never seen, and she seemed, I want to find the right word, she seemed interested. In things. In going out, in making plans, in talking. For a few days, I thought maybe we'd turn some kind of corner. Maybe absence had worked the way absence is supposed to work sometimes. But then I noticed it wasn't really directed at me. Not specifically. She was in a good mood in a general sense. The way you're in a good mood when something is going well in your life. And that something didn't seem to be me coming home. I said nothing because I didn't know what I'd be saying. In April, her phone started going face down on the kitchen counter. This was new. Her phone had always sat face up because she got work emails and dental office stuff at all hours, and she liked to be able to glance at it without picking it up. Face down was new. I noticed it twice, then 3 times, and each time I had a moment of something, a small cold current of something, and then I told it to stop. She also started spending more time on the laptop in the evenings, which wasn't totally unusual. She did a lot of the household admin stuff, bills, appointments. The dental office required some after-hours emails occasionally. But the sessions were longer, and she'd close the laptop or navigate away when I walked through the room. And there's a specific quality to the speed at which someone closes a laptop that tells you everything you need to know. A casual close is slow. The other kind has a particular velocity to it. I noticed and I didn't speak. There was a name. She mentioned Derek once in April, in passing, said she'd run into him at the hardware store on Speedway, and they'd chatted for a minute. He'd asked how the patio was holding up. I said something like, "Oh yeah, good guy," or whatever, the appropriate nothing, and she said yeah he was nice, and that was the end of it. Except I remember the quality of her voice when she said it. A certain smoothness. The way someone sounds when they've practiced a version of what they're saying enough times that it comes out clean. I told myself I was imagining the smoothness. By May I had stopped being able to fully convince myself I was imagining things. But here's the part that's specific to my situation, and maybe it's specific to a lot of people in jobs like mine. When you're gone 11 or 12 days at a stretch, you don't have the ability to notice things the way you would if you were home every evening. The changes accumulate while you're out on I-10 outside of El Paso at 2 in the morning, and then you come home and try to take a reading, and what you're measuring isn't the current state of things, it's the delta between now and the last time you were home. And by the time the delta is large enough to clearly register, a lot has already happened. I started paying attention in the way that you pay attention when you don't want to pay attention, but your brain won't let you stop. On the road, I'd run through what I knew. The face-down phone, the laptop sessions, the hair, the earrings, the elevated mood. Derek at the hardware store on Speedway. I'd build it up and then tear it down and tell myself it was the isolation talking. 11 days alone in a cab gives you plenty of time to construct narratives out of nothing. One night in May, I was at a truck stop outside of Benson, sitting in the cab eating a gas station sandwich that tasted exactly like you'd expect, and I was on the phone with Sandra. Normal check-in call. And she sounded fine. Good, even. She asked about the route, told me about something that happened at the dental office, mentioned that the lemon tree had put out a bunch of new growth. Completely normal. And I was sitting there in the dark with this terrible suspended feeling, like someone had pressed pause right before something fell, and I thought, this is what going crazy feels like. This is the feeling people describe right before they do something stupid and destructive based on nothing. I finished the sandwich. I finished the call. I went to sleep in the cab because I had an early morning, and I told myself to let it go. The thing is, I've been driving for 18 years. You develop a sensitivity to things that are off, because on a long haul, something off can kill you. A sound the engine's not supposed to make, a shimmy in the steering that wasn't there yesterday, a vibration that's slightly wrong. You learn not to dismiss those signals just because you can't immediately name the source. You pull over. You check. I kept not pulling over. When I got home from that run, I was in the kitchen at the counter, standing there in my work clothes, exhausted in the specific bone-level way of 11 days on the road. And I thought, I'll sit down, check the weather for next week's route, eat something, shower. Just decompress. Just stop for 10 minutes. I opened the laptop and it woke up from sleep, and the screen was right there. For tabs. I want to tell this part slowly because it happened slowly, even though it also happened in an instant. There are two speeds to a thing like this. The speed at which you read words on a screen, which is fast, and the speed at which those words become real, which is something else entirely. The Gmail tab was the second one from the left. I saw her name at the top of the browser before I even clicked on it, Sandra's account, her profile picture, the tiny circle with her face in it. I hadn't clicked on that tab. It was just there, already open, because she'd used the laptop last and hadn't closed it. The open email was from Derek, sent 2 days before, while I was on the road. I read it. I'm not going to reproduce it here because some of it was explicit and some of it was private in a way that is hard to explain. Private in the sense that it was meant for her, and reading it made me feel like I'd fallen through a floor into a room I was never supposed to be in. But the general content was, he missed her. The previous time they'd seen each other had been, in his words, everything. There was something in particular he kept thinking about. He asked when I was coming back. He used the phrase, our time. Our time. I sat with that email for maybe 2 minutes. Then, and I am not proud of this, and I'm also not ashamed of it, I scrolled up. For months of emails. Hundreds of them. Back and forth, a whole conversation I had no idea existed. I didn't read all of them. I couldn't have, not in one sitting, not in 100 sittings, but I read enough to understand the shape of what had been happening. It had started in January, not long after the patio work. Derek had emailed to follow up professionally. Was everything holding up? Any issues with the drainage? And Sandra had replied, and then he'd replied, and at some point the emails had shifted and neither of them had turned back. From the emails I pieced together Derek Weston's life in a way I hadn't wanted to know. He was 39, had grown up in Tucson, had started his concrete business after leaving a larger construction company 8 years ago. He'd been married, briefly, in his early 30s. It hadn't lasted. No kids. He seemed to have made peace with it. He talked about his work like someone who was genuinely proud of what he built with his hands, and reading that was its own specific kind of awful, because I could see exactly how that would have been appealing to a woman whose husband came home and sat on the porch in a fog for 3 days before being fully present. He had a dog named Biscuit. I know this because he mentioned the dog several times and Sandra had asked about it, and their exchange about the dog was warm in a way that made me close the laptop for a minute and sit in the kitchen with my hands on the table. Then I opened it again and kept reading. By the time I stopped, about 40 minutes had passed. The kitchen had gotten dimmer, the afternoon sun had moved, and I sat there in the near dark and I felt something I can only describe as the opposite of surprise. Not shock. Something heavier and slower than shock. Like I'd been waiting for the specific weight of this thing without knowing that's what I'd been doing. And now it had arrived. And it was exactly as heavy as I'd been afraid it would be. I heard Sandra's car in the driveway. I did not close the laptop. She came through the front door the way she always did. Keys on the hook by the door, bag dropped on the chair in the entryway, then into the kitchen. I heard all of this before I saw her. By the time she walked into the kitchen, I was still sitting at the counter, hands on the table, laptop open between us. She stopped in the doorway. For a moment, neither of us said anything. She looked at the laptop. She looked at me. And then she looked at the laptop again, and whatever color was in her face at that moment left it. Owen, I was checking the weather, I said. That's all I was doing. She didn't say anything. You left it open. I know. Her voice was quiet. Not guilty quiet. More like the quiet of someone stepping carefully on uncertain ground. How long? She set her bag down on the chair beside her, slowly, like she needed something to do with her hands. Owen, Sandra, how long? Since January. Just above a whisper. January. The patio. He'd come to fix our patio, and then he'd stayed, just not in any way I could see. Are you in love with him? She didn't answer right away, and the not answering was worse than anything she could have said. I need you to answer that. I don't. She stopped. Started again. I don't know what I. Yes or no, Sandra? It's not. I can't just. Try. She looked at the floor. I have feelings for him. That I don't know how to. Okay. I stood up. Okay. Owen, please just. I need you to not talk right now. I need you to give me a minute. She went quiet. I walked to the back door and opened it and stood on the patio that Derek Weston had poured for us. Clean concrete, good drainage, solid work. And I looked at Sandra's lemon tree in the last of the daylight, and I stood there until I felt like I could hold a sentence together without it coming apart. When I came back in, she was sitting at the kitchen table, hands in her lap, looking like someone waiting for a verdict. Was it ever just work? I asked. The emails. Some of the evenings, I stopped. I was gone for 11 days. Were there nights when, Owen, don't. I need to. Please don't ask me that right now. Please. The please was the wrong word to use. It made me understand that she was protecting herself from having to answer, not protecting me from having to hear it, and the distinction was important. I'm going to go stay at Tommy's, I said. Tommy is my younger brother. He lives about 20 minutes away in Marana. He has a spare room, and he doesn't ask too many questions before he's ready to. I need a few days. You don't have to leave. This is your. I know it's my house. I want to go. She started to say something else. I picked up my keys and my bag, which was still by the door because I hadn't unpacked it, and I left. I sat in my truck in the driveway for about 5 minutes first. Force of habit. When things are hard, I end up in the cab. I've spent 18 years solving problems from that seat. I sat there in the driveway of my own house on Waverly Street, and I listened to the neighborhood, and then I drove to Tommy's. A lot of you responded to the original post, and I want to say thank you genuinely. Some of you have been through the same thing and said so, and reading those comments during the worst nights helped more than I can properly explain. A few of you asked questions that made me think harder about things I was avoiding thinking about, which was uncomfortable and also necessary. One person commented that the detail about the dog was the thing that got them, and I want you to know I thought about that comment for 3 days straight, so congratulations on that. Here's where things went. I stayed at Tommy's for 9 days. Tommy is 40, works in HVAC, has been divorced himself for about 3 years, and he has a particular quality that I've always valued in him, which is that he waits until you want to talk, and then he actually listens instead of just loading up his next point. He let me sleep in the spare room and make bad decisions about how much coffee to drink and watch baseball games I didn't care about. And on the 4th night, he knocked on the door and said, "You want to talk about it?" And I said yes, and we sat on his back porch until 2 in the morning, and I told him everything. He didn't tell me what to do. He said, "That's a lot," several times, which was accurate. He said he was sorry, which helped more than the complicated things people sometimes say. He did not make a single joke about the patio, which I appreciate because I know it must have been tempting. Sandra and I have talked 6 times since I left. 3 times about logistics. Once about something she said she needed me to understand, once about next steps in a practical sense, and once, last week, about something harder and more complicated that I'll get to. She has not moved out, and I have not asked her to, at least not formally, because the house is more complicated than just whose name is on the lease. We own it, both of us, and the equity and the mortgage and all of that is tangled in a way that requires actual legal untangling. I've spoken to an attorney. Sandra has not yet, as far as I know, though I've suggested she does. My parents found out because my mother called while I was at Tommy's and I was not in a condition to be evasive. My mother is 71 and has strong opinions and a complete inability to keep them to herself, and the 20 minutes after I told her were some of the loudest 20 minutes of my recent life. My father got on after and was quiet in the way he's quiet when he's processing something. And then he said, "Come down for dinner on Sunday," and I said okay. I went. We ate. We didn't talk about it directly. My mother made enchiladas and kept refilling my plate without asking, which is her version of an embrace, and I drove back to Tommy's and felt slightly less like I was falling. Sandra's family doesn't know. That's her business to manage, and I've decided to stay out of it. Our mutual friends, we have maybe 4 or 5 couples we spend time with, have responded in the various ways people respond. 2 couples have gone silent, which I understand, and 1, Vic and Paulette, came and found me specifically and made it clear which side of this they were on without me having to ask. Vic has known me since we were both 22 and doing things we shouldn't have been doing, and his loyalty is the non-negotiable kind. The complication nobody saw coming. Derek Weston reached out to me directly. About 2 weeks after everything came out, I got a text from a number I didn't have saved. It was him. He said he understood if I wanted nothing to do with him, that he wasn't asking for anything, but that he wanted me to know that he was sorry and that he hadn't intended for things to go the way they went. I read the text 4 times. I thought about what I wanted to do with it. Then I called my attorney and asked if responding in any way was advisable, and she said no, and I put my phone down. I have not responded. I don't plan to. There is nothing Derek Weston can say to me that I need to hear. He is a real person with a dog named Biscuit and a business he's proud of and apparently a particular talent for being around when a marriage has a gap in it. And I don't wish him any specific ill, but I also don't owe him the energy of a response. What I didn't expect was how much that text would bother me. Not its existence. I'd figured at some point he might reach out. It was the content. I hadn't intended for things to go this way. As if intention was the relevant question. As if things that aren't intended don't still happen and don't still land exactly where they land. I spent a whole drive to Phoenix thinking about that text, and by Picacho Peak I decided that his intentions were his to keep. The internal stuff is harder to put into words, but I'll try. The first night at Tommy's I lay on the spare room mattress and stared at the ceiling and did the inventory you're not supposed to do. Going back through 7 years looking for every moment I'd been in the fog when I should have been present, every time she'd reached for something and I'd been half somewhere else. There's a lot of those moments when you go looking. You find everything you were afraid you'd find. I keep thinking about a specific evening, maybe 2 years ago. We'd had a good day. I'd been home a few days, not yet resorting to the porch, and we'd driven out to Saguaro National Park in the late afternoon because Sandra had been wanting to and I finally said yes. And we'd walked one of the trails in the golden hour, the cacti enormous and backlit and strange, and Sandra had been happy in that uncomplicated way that she could be sometimes, and I'd felt it too. I thought about that evening a lot in the first week. I don't know exactly why that one specifically. Maybe because it was evidence that we'd had it right at some point and then lost it, which is different from never having had it at all. I found a birthday card she'd given me 3 years ago. It was in the drawer of the nightstand because I never throw those things away, which is its own kind of problem. It said things in her handwriting that I won't repeat here. I sat on the edge of the bed in Tommy's spare room and held this card for a while, and then I put it in my bag, and I haven't looked at it since, but I also haven't thrown it away. I don't know what that means. Probably something. I still wake up at 5:30, which is road time, ingrained after 18 years. The first morning at Tommy's I woke up at 5:30 and lay there for a full minute before I remembered where I was and why. And the remembering hit like a second impact. It does that every morning. You'd think it would get easier with repetition, but so far it just gets slightly more expected, which is not quite the same thing. I stopped at a diner on Oracle Road last week. Different dental practice end of the street, not Sandra's. And I ordered coffee and sat in a window booth and watched Tucson wake up, the morning light coming flat and pale off the mountains, the city doing its ordinary morning things. And I thought about how a place just keeps going. It doesn't register what happened to you. Tucson doesn't care. The saguaros are still out there in the national park, standing in the heat, enormous and indifferent. There's something about that I find either comforting or devastating, depending on the hour. Here's where I actually am. Sandra and I had a hard conversation last week, the one I mentioned. She told me that she had ended things with Derek, that it had happened around the time I found the emails, not because she'd been caught, but because, and I want to be careful about how I phrase this, because seeing the laptop open and seeing my face had made something real that she'd been keeping abstract. I don't know what to do with that. I've been sitting with it. She asked if I would consider talking to someone together. A counselor, a therapist, whatever the right word is. She wasn't asking me to come home or to decide anything. She was asking for a conversation in a structured setting, with someone who knows what they're doing, where we could at least understand what happened and why. I told her I needed to think about it. And I have been thinking about it, which is more than I could have said 3 weeks ago. That's either progress or the beginning of a mistake, and I genuinely cannot tell which. I'm back on the road next week. A run up to Salt Lake, then across to Denver, back down through Albuquerque. 8 days. I used to find the road clarifying. All that space and motion, nothing to do but drive and think. I'm hoping it does that again. I'm hoping 8 days of moving through the desert and the mountains gives me enough stillness on the inside to figure out what I actually want. Whether there's something here worth the work of trying to rebuild. Whether trust, once it's been taken apart the way mine has, can be reassembled into something that holds weight? I don't know the answer. I'm 44 years old, and I've driven probably 2 million miles on American roads, and I've gotten very good at knowing which direction I'm going. And right now, I genuinely don't know. That is a strange feeling for me. I'm trying to sit with it instead of just pointing the truck somewhere and driving. Derek Weston's concrete work is still holding up, by the way. The drainage on the back patio is exactly right. That detail is so specifically awful that I've started laughing about it when nobody's around, which I think means I'm going to be okay eventually. I went out and stood in the backyard the night before I'm posting this. It was late, maybe 11. The temperature had finally dropped to something livable. Sandra's lemon tree was there in the dark, full of fruit that's not quite ripe yet, and the lavender she planted along the fence was putting out that smell that Tucson gets in summer. And the sky was that particular deep blue-black with a few stars visible even through the city light. It was very quiet. I stood out there for a while and I thought, whatever happens next, this is still the backyard where we planted things together. That happened. It was real. And no one gets to take that part away. I'm not sure what I'm doing with that thought yet, but it's the one I keep coming back to, so I figure it must mean something. 18 years on the road. And the thing that finally stopped me in my tracks wasn't weather or traffic or a mechanical failure on I-10 at midnight. It was 4 browser tabs on a Tuesday afternoon in my own kitchen, and the life I thought I had sitting open right there on the screen. Tomorrow, a man's elderly father calls him out of nowhere to confess something he's been hiding for 30 years, and what he says forces the entire family to question everything they thought they knew about where they came from.